In Georgia, as both parties are expected to raise massive amounts of cash ahead of 2 January runoffs, which will determine the balance of power in the Senate. Democrat Stacey Abrams' voting rights group, Fair Fight, brought in almost $10 million just since last Friday, while GOP incumbents Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, along with the Senate GOP fundraising arm, raised $32 million in the past 6 days. Florida Senator Rick Scott, the new head of the Senate Republican campaign arm, will stop in Georgia today, and he says the stakes couldn't be higher.
Georgians are like, Floridians, like most of the country. We like the life we have. We don't want higher taxes. We don't want our, we don't want people to take away our religious freedom and our Second Amendment rights. We like the police. We like law enforcement. We like public safety.
So, Guy, as we keep talking about Georgia, this is where everything comes down to.
Yep, and I think Senators Perdue and Loeffler are probably the slight favorites in these races, but I think Republicans obviously should take nothing for granted there because of what's at stake. I think their opponents in those races, Ossoff is not terribly impressive to me. I think he's sort of underqualified mediocrity. I think you'll find as more oppo comes out on Reverend Warnock that he's out of the mainstream, especially for Georgia. But look, the amount of money that's going to be spent is enormous, and if I were the Republicans, I would just play on a loop Democrats talking about the stakes here. Chuck Schumer in the streets of New York saying we're going to take Georgia and change America. AOC saying we have to win Georgia so we don't have to negotiate with the Republicans. That's as clear as it gets. It's their words, not mine. And as I said, if I were the GOP in those campaigns, I would try to make sure every Georgian heard those clips as often as possible for the next 6 weeks.
Murray, given the enormous amount of money that was poured into the South Carolina Senate race, for example, $100 million on behalf of the Democrat there, and the loss that came with it, is it going to be hard for Democrats in Georgia now to get those big checks, given the lack of success previously?
I don't think so, Katie, in part because Joe Biden won Georgia last week. We have seen that Democrats can win statewide in Georgia. It just happened. And so there is a pathway, a sort of playbook here that Democrats are going to try to use. And so I do not think Republicans or Democrats should take these seats for granted. I think you will see a lot of high-profile leaders on both sides of the aisle head down to Georgia to try to get their side to turn out. The question will be whether Republicans turn out when Donald Trump's not on the ballot. But I do think when we look at these numbers of how much spending goes into these races, this is a side note, we need campaign finance reform in this country. The things we could do with that money, quite frankly, any of this money in this last election cycle kind of makes your heart hurt a little bit.
Emily, your thoughts about the Georgia runoffs?
Right, $32 million in cash in 6 days is an incredible achievement for sure. But I think to your point, Katie, we've learned in 2020 that there is a limit to the benefit that money can bring, right? The South Carolina and Kentucky Senate races, that was $200 million for unsuccessful campaigns by the Democrats. So I think what's equally important to cash flow or more here in Georgia is energizing the voting base and getting the GOP voters to turn out. I think a visit from President Trump would go a long way in doing that. But I also think that the sort of get out and go rally needs to happen closer to the actual runoff date in January.
All right, Harris, we'll get you on the other side, okay? House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy with a bold prediction about Republicans retaking the chamber in 2 years, why he says Democrats saw their majority shrink last week, and why he says they'll do even worse next time around.